You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's Editor-in-Chief, Giles Parkinson, and leading energy analyst, David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Renew Economy and founder and editor of EV-focused sister site The Driven. And joining me, as usual, is ITK Principal David Leach. David, I trust you well. Is that a passport in your hand?
Passport, yes, in my hand. It's a shame because I had been hoping to chair a session at Australian Energy Week, but the opportunity to go to China and then to go on the smart energy and look at some of these electric car and truck factories and batteries being made. I just couldn't really turn that down.
I think it's going to be. I think that's going to be fascinating, David.
Well, if I don't come back, you'll know that I was invited to have a cup of coffee down at the local police station.
A cup of tea, I suggest, but
cup of tea, yes.
Green tea. Yes, that's right.
And meantime, if we move from China to Europe, we've got a great interview this week, haven't we?
Look, we do. Yeah, we've actually got the interview with the CEO of SMA Group, German inverter company. Took the world by storm, 30 or 40 years ago, and then China came along, and it's been battling ever since, but still a powerful player, particularly in Europe, and growing its interests elsewhere. So we did catch up with the CEO, Jürgen Reinart, a week or so ago, actually. So we did have this one in the can for a while, but let's have a listen. It's a really interesting interview. Jürgen Reinart, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast.
Thank you very much for hosting it and having me.
Well, it's delightful to have the global CEO of one of the famous names in the energy transition. Now, SMA would be familiar to most people, I think, sort of involved in this energy transition. Just remind us, you were one of the very first people to sort of embrace it, or one of the first companies to embrace it, one of the first starters. Tell us a little bit of background about how it started and what you are still doing.
Yes, I'm glad to do that. So SMA indeed was founded 45 years ago this year, so in 81, by 3 engineers of the Kassel University with their professor. And they decided that at that time already, 45 years ago, that they would like to have a sustainable future on energy supply. So they were starting with small and big wind power stations. So also the first one of going into the direction of 1 megawatt and a wind power station. And then they also started to develop the first string inverters as we know it. And thereby actually it became commercially viable to use photovoltaics on the roof. Because what they did with those patents is that they invented that you can put the modules into a string. So you connect the modules of the PV system in series, and thereby you only use one inverter to convert that DC generated electricity into AC usable in your house. That was in the 80s. The patent lasted for 20 years, of course, and it really brought the commercial viability into photovoltaics. Then there was a 100 roof program in Germany, and which turned then into a 1,000 roof program, where people got a lot of subsidies to actually feed in that energy from their own roof system. And SMA started to grow very, very quickly. Once thereafter, also the subsidy came in on a broader scale for feed-in tariff in Germany. And SMA then was lucky to grow from roughly 60 million euros to 2 billion euros, so roughly the same in US dollars, of course, within 10 years. And that meant that quite often...
That's sales, just to be clear.
Sorry? That's sales. Yes.
That's sales. And then you listed on the exchange, I think, as well.
Exactly. In 2008, we went onto the stock exchange. But that meant in the 2000 years that it was from 2000 to 2010 that quite often was a doubling of the revenue organically year on year. Then 2010 it was at 2 billion with 30% EBIT, so a very good profitability, bottom line as well. And then about that time, it started to go worse because that was too good to be true.
The Chinese arrived.
Exactly. The Chinese saw, of course, what is happening in the world on photovoltaics, went into that as well, started to produce modules much cheaper than they were being produced here in Europe, and started also to go into the inverter space where we were in. And until that time, we roughly had 50% of the world market share, though you have to bear in mind that the German market was 50% of the world market at that time. So Germany had 8 gigawatts of power photovoltaics to be new installed in 2010, and the whole world was something like 16 at that time. Nowadays, of course, the picture is totally different. We have a world market that is many hundred gigawatts per year, and 2/3 of that is China alone. So in China, you have an implementation of 2/3 of the newly installed capacity each year of the entire world, and the rest of the world makes 1/3. And that is
I have to comment that there's still a huge amount of capacity excess
correct.
in just about every one of these products, including in China, solar panels. It's nothing new in solar panels, but I suspect, and you will tell me if I'm wrong, it's also spreading to inverters as well. And to just also a story, because I lived through it as an analyst in Europe. Firstly, the European solar panel markets had to go away, and nearly all the panels are made in China for the most part now. And then, it's very difficult to compete with the integrated nature of inverters and solar panel manufacturers from China.
Exactly. It happened roughly like that. First of all, the fight was getting heavier on the module side, as you said, and nowadays, depending on if you look at monocrystalline or crystalline, if you look at on cell, or if you look at the entire module, but we are roughly at 95% dependency on China in the entire world when it comes to modules. And in inverters for Europe, for example, it is so that we are at 80% from China nowadays. So 80% of all newly installed inverters are also from China in the whole of Europe.
And so you've had to oversee essentially a repositioning of SMA in the market away from the residential into the commercial side of things, where your software skills perhaps and even security sort of strengths play more strongly. Is that a fair statement?
That is a very fair statement. It started actually, as I said, then in 2010. Until 2014, we tried to keep the good spirit, but our revenue went down from the 2 billion I mentioned to about 800 million in just 2-3 years, meaning we needed to go into restructuring. We needed to lay off about 40% of our engineers in 1 year because we wouldn't survive otherwise. And also the rest of the company needed to go to a heavy restructuring. And at that time, after that big restructuring, we decided we need to look into broader fields. So we went into power to gas, we went into charging stations for electric vehicles, we went into energy management, and we did already in the 2000s go much more into the large scale application. So really the utility scale application. And today I can say that 80% of our revenues is utility applications, and only 20% is the residential market and the commercial market. So the company
and again, just on that, sorry to keep interrupting. It's the investment banking analyst in me. Just on the revenue, I think it's also useful to talk about geography, because for a Chinese company, it's going to be all about China, but for a non-Chinese company, it's going to be about maybe in order the Americas and Europe and then Asia, including Australia. Is that a way to think about it?
Yes. So if you look at our revenue today, then we have roughly 40 to 45% in America, and we have roughly 35 to 40% in Europe, and we have a good deal of about 15 to 20% in Australia, actually. So it's our third biggest market, especially for the large scale applications. So it has become a totally different picture. That's correct. And the Chinese, of course, on the other hand, have their home market, which we cannot enter, to be honest, on any good, reasonable scale. But they are also, of course, going into foreign countries. As I said, 80% of the market share in Europe right now. but very much banned to some extent, at least in some projects in the USA, and this getting heavier, of course, now. So we do see a big chance to continue to compete well in the USA, but also in several other markets where we do see a trend. So Japanese market is getting stricter on Chinese inverters and manufacturers, and so are other markets also, because we see this high dependency on China to be difficult due to the fact that energy is critical infrastructure. And you need to remember one thing, to point that out directly at the beginning. All these inverters that we have are, of course, intelligent in contrast to PV modules, meaning they are connected to the internet and you can switch them off remotely. If you do that,
And so just on that, sorry, just to
Yeah.
continue on that thing, and I'm asking far too many questions, but in inverters in Australia, one of our big themes for years has been the switch from grid following to grid forming inverters, where intelligence and security are even bigger issues. And would I be correct in saying that SMA has a strong position, even in Australia, in the area of grid forming inverters, and that you had something that provided quite a lot of virtual inertia that you ran in a European system?
Yeah, but I would even turn it around. I think we've learned a lot from Australia. Australia is, of course, if you look at the grid, it's an island, because in contrast to Europe, you don't have a connection to many other countries around. It's a huge island, of course. It's partially unstable grids, weak grids, and AEMO has been doing a very good job to make clear that they want the connection point to be simulated before it is connected. They want to see that it's really stable, and they want to see that it's grid forming capabilities, as you said, in that system. And we are a front runner on that. We have had a market share in Australia, especially on the large scale applications, on the utility scale applications, which was on PV at sometimes up to over 50% of the market share. And now storage getting in more, of course, getting more and more important. And I can come back to that. We do see that we are very well positioned exactly with that possibility to form the grid, as you said, to stabilize the grid, to stabilize the frequency, and to have all the grid functionality that a normal power station would have, or even beyond that, due to the fact that we are inverter-based resources, meaning we have a lot of intelligence in the system, decentralized, put over the country, and thereby have the possibility to form a very stable grid with these inverters. And that's fully correct. And that is really a key factor of SMA, that we are better there than all our competition when it comes to grid forming.
Just on that, there's a big debate in Australia about the needs for system strength, particularly as the coal and the gas generators exit. And some of your competitors have argued that grid forming inverters can provide all the system strength services. AEMO is still uncertain about that. The transmission companies are even less certain because they're worried about sort of fault current and the reactions and things like that. And they're committed to spending many tens of billions of dollars or many billions of dollars on synchronous condensers, big ugly machines which have been around for 50 years. Is your company on the same wavelength, probably the right word for it, as the others, on grid forming inverters and their ability to provide essentially all the services that coal-fired generators did? Or do you accept that syncons are still needed in some form or another?
Yes, I would definitely say it is fully possible to make it fully on renewables. Of course, together with storage, you have, of course, the situation that is very clear, and that is one of the first arguments always I would say the lobby from the fossil fuels, of course, brings in, is that you have only production when the sun is shining. Of course, that's like that. Therefore, first of all, it's a good combination to have wind and solar together when it's possible, at least when the circumstances are right. Definitely have storage in the system, and definitely have then all that grid functionality that I was speaking about. And yes, I'm very much assured that it's fully possible to do that with inverter-based resources. You can stabilize the grid. You can insert inertia into the system like condensers by power electronics, and that is fully possible. And we can show that also because we are driving smaller islands fully on PV and storage. And we've done that for the last 10, 15 years. So we have the situation that we can drive a complete island only with storage and photovoltaics. And I also want to mention that in Germany, on a normal sunny day, even on a day that is a weekday with a lot of industry energy needed, we have the situation that we are up to 100% quite often only of photovoltaics. And we have taken off, together with the grid provider, we've taken off cities off the net without the people in the city knowing it, only then being driven by photovoltaics, etc. So we have a lot of proof in and around Europe, but also in Australia and different islands, as I said, that it is possible to fully drive the entire grid on photovoltaics, together with wind if possible, with storage, of course, and with a clever energy management and grid functionality. That is possible. And this is hard to believe for people that were used, of course, to the central form of power generation and having rotating masses in order to keep the inertia. But that is possible with power electronics. That is
And maybe you could just touch on the fault current, which is the one area that I hear people talking about where we need the synchronous condensers, because the way it's been expressed by one of your US competitors to me is that the transistors and the solid state components just can't handle. You have to manage fault current differently, perhaps with smaller signals. How do you think about that?
That is definitely would have been true 20 years ago. Then we had thyristor controls. Then it went into slower IGBTs. So that's the semiconductors, the power semiconductors that were used. Nowadays, all of our inverters use MOSFET technologies, very fast switching, very capable of providing all the short circuit capabilities you need. Once again, always together in a system with a good design, medium voltage connection with storage in the system, and we can have that in milliseconds. So I can give you the example of actually AI data centers where we do have the situation that a data center nowadays, the new ones being designed, especially in the US, they are up to 1 gigawatt in size. So that's like a huge nuclear power station or a coal-fired power station. 1 gigawatt in size for one AI data center. And those have a load jump due to the fact that the AI decides when to do the job an AI center does. They have load cycles that sometimes 60% of that, so up to 600 megawatt, can switch within milliseconds. And we're talking about 20 milliseconds. And all of that can be done by inverter-based resources. Even in fault situations, fault right-through and other functionality are fully available in inverter-based resources. So no, it's not correct anymore that one cannot do that with power electronics.
Well, that's good, because the people at AEMO and also the transmission companies listen very carefully to this podcast. So I'm glad you got that message through. I'm very conscious of time, so I just want to go do a quick round the houses on a couple of other issues I wanted to raise. You did talk about utility scale being the dominant factor in your business model now. So what's happened to the home business? Can you not compete with the Chinese anymore? Can you just clarify what the situation is in Australia? Because I understand you may have actually left the Australian household market.
That's correct. And we have, as I said, we have today a situation, we have two P&L oriented divisions. The one is large scale, which have full R&D, full operations and everything within the division. They they add 80% of our revenues, while the home and business, which is residential and C&I, comprise 20% of our revenues. And they've been going through a very tough time due to oversupplies, especially from China, not only on modules, but also on inverters, due to a market that went down very quickly after the Ukrainian war. Fear disappeared, at least here in Europe. And then there was an oversupply and very low prices, meaning we had to go through a restructuring for the home and business division, while the large scale division was continuing to grow very, very well. And we did that in different senses. We said that we will look at the portfolio, which we did, so we streamlined it. We also said that we will exit some markets. And as Australia had become a smaller market for us on the home and business applications, we decided to exit that market in Australia and in a few other countries around the world. that does not mean we are exiting the market for residential and commercial. The Home and Business Solution division continues, but continues with a smaller focus, and not in Australia. That's correct. We will continue to serve our customers for service, etc. We will, of course, do that as we always do, but we have decided to exit the market when it comes from to a point of new sales. But on the contrary, I must say, and I want to add, we are putting even more power into the market when it comes to utility scale applications. So storage, photovoltaics, the combination in a hybrid system that we are very much focusing on with new products also coming this year, especially to Australia directly from the beginning. And we will put even more resources and focus into the Australian market, as it's a very important market for us.
We've seen a lot of the European solar manufacturers try to resist the onslaught of the Chinese and be unsuccessful. You guys have sort of held on. You've defined the markets that you want to concentrate on, but the Chinese aren't going away. What does the future hold?
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question. You might have heard that in Europe, it was now decided 2 weeks ago that European funded projects may not use inverters from certain countries, and that's Iran, Russia, it's North Korea, and it's China. European funded projects, I must say. And that comes exactly from the fact that the European Commission has decided that it's so important to be able to have a stable grid and not to need to rely on inverter manufacturers from one country, or also from those 4 countries. And that's why it was decided to start with that. And the ambition is to have about 50% of the inverters being implemented in Europe are coming from Europe and have the base here also. And this is an important step for Europe, and it's a novelty, because Europe has always been very reluctant to really impose stronger measures. But this is starting, and as I said, also in other countries. And due to the fact, as I quickly mentioned at the beginning, that there's a huge potential for cyber attacks also, as you can switch off those inverters that are connected to the net. If you do that simultaneously, the whole net will go down. And that is something we need to be very careful about, and we need to have a very detailed look at, and that security is important.
I'm the world's worst security person, but I have 2 questions about it. The first one is, I suppose that if you buy a Chinese inverter, how do they get the ability to control it? Do they have to build a back door into the code, or is it because you're always linked to the manufacturer? How does it actually happen in practice?
No, it is so that for example, every inverter has, of course, normally 2 processors. One is driving the power electronics, and the other one is connected to the internet, is doing all the applications that you can use it in your smartphone, etc. And all the manufacturers, especially on home and business, I must say, have the ability to do software updates on those inverters and to actually be able to control them, to switch them up.
So it's no different to Musk deciding that your cars should play a song at a particular time of the day if he wanted to do that.
Exactly.
I mean, and this is the way everything is basically software upgradable these days, isn't it? I mean, the vast majority of devices. So it's interesting. And so, may I just ask, it's the analyst in me, I can't help ask these silly questions, because I imagine that all the components actually come from China or Malaysia, like the actual power, the components that go on the boards. Is that correct?
Yeah, but you see, there we have another situation. If you look at the FEOC rules that are coming from the USA, it is one part to look very closely at that, and that especially intelligent components may not come from China. So if you look at our large-scale central inverters, once again, 80% of our revenues, we are down to 2-3% of components coming from China, and especially not the chips with the intelligence in. So that's very important for us to comply with, and that's what we're showing also, especially in the USA. So we do source internationally. We do have second sourcing, as we always need to be cost aware. But we have sourced away from China to the absolute greatest extent, and that is very important for us. An additional importance is that we have all data hosted only in Europe. So we don't have it hosted somewhere else. And
Yep. I get that. Everyone's very conscious of their data. We even have metadata laws in Australia, which I think might even give a data centre that was based on cloud computing something to think about, but not an AI one. The other thing I just wanted to ask, more as an investment banking style analyst, is about growth. I mean, you may be able, with the advantage of the security side of things, let me just call it that, to protect your market in Europe and the United States, but you can't really build growth off that. And I think your forecast, your profitability is still not that strong, if I could put it modestly. I mean, you have to do. You want to grow your top line, and do you need to vertically integrate, or you suggest that you've tried to diversify? I think was the famous phrase, and that didn't work back in the day. But how do you think about the future?
No, I'm actually looking rather brightly into the future. Yes, you're right. We had 2 consecutive years, 24 and 25, at negative result, but that was, to be very clear, coming from one division only, where we needed to also scrap a lot of material, and we needed to take it out of the books. Even the development costs for the projects we needed to take out of the books. And therefore, we had the situation that the whole company was negative the last 2 years on an EBIT level, so on a bottom line. The large scale actually was growing faster than the market. We took market share over the last 3 years from our Chinese competition even, and we grew from roughly 440 million in 22 to over 1.2 billion now. So it's a tripling of our revenues with a very good profitability, and we're taking market share. And why is that? That's exactly what I said, where we learned from Australia, of our market there, very good grid forming capabilities, and giving the customer the security of the supply as well as of forming the grid, and thereby making his business model function. So that is what is happening, and we will this year grow. We have shown that in our guidance, and we have even clarified that our guidance will be in the top range now just some weeks ago. So we will have a top line growth, and we will be profitable at, as we see it, at least 100 million euros EBIT on the bottom line. So we do see a growth now coming from both divisions, with the restructuring being done in Home and Business Solutions, and both getting into profit, or large scale staying in profitability, and Home and Business getting to profitability latest next year again.
I've got 2 questions, probably just to wrap up. One, you're in the center of Germany, quite literally, I think, at the moment. Germany has led the world in the sort of the energy transition. A lot of questions about it now, a lot of debate in your own political circles. You've got governments now which are not necessarily fully supportive. Some even regret the exit from nuclear, et cetera, some want to slow down the EV mandates and things like that. Can you just give us a picture? I mean, are people still, is it still green? Is it still want the green energy? How's that whole green energy transition happening in Germany? Because there's so much talk about it, prices being high, politics being unstable.
Yeah, you're right about that. We have a very unstable situation. So I will actually meet with the Minister of Economic Affairs next Tuesday in Berlin, and we always are in dialogue, of course, on German, but also on European level. And there is a lot of uncertainties. You're fully right, and there's a lot of discussions going back into nuclear, while keeping in mind that if you would build a power station now, you would be finished in 15 years probably. So it's not a solution for turning it quickly. And the costs are at a much higher level than photovoltaics and storage together. So if you ask the utilities themselves, RWE or the others in Europe and Germany, you will notice that they all say, we don't want to go back to nuclear, and we don't want to increase coal-powered stations. We want to go into renewables, and we want to continue that route. So we do have a very clear picture from the industry and even from the utilities, but we do have a lot of uncertainties as the government still has not decided exactly where to go, and we hope, of course, to influence that in a positive way in our sense, and as we think also, generally speaking, out of a cost perspective and time perspective, and we're quite positive about that, because in the end, physics can can decide of what is.
Jürgen, it's not just Ukraine and Russia and gas, but now we see oil, and the car electrification might have started for one reason, but everyone's doing it for a different reason now. But I suppose my point is, the original ideas, whatever, they're all working. That the decarbonisation is playing out to Europe's advantage, I would have said.
Yes, and we do see that now, of course, with the war in the Middle East, that there's a lot of talk helping us because the dependency on oil and gas, of course, is higher. The costs are high, and there we do see the situation turning for us again. Also with the order intake, which is huge, we have a very good book-to-bill ratio, so much more order intake than revenues at the moment for this year. And this is coming from the fact that the people see the stability in not needing to depend on other countries for the import of gas and oil, as we have had with Ukraine and Russia war when it started more than 5 years ago, or now also with the Middle East. And that is something that is definitely helping us right now in the augmentation. And the people see it also in electric vehicles, where it's always a big discussion, as you rightly say, in Europe and especially in Germany. But we do see a slow but sure trend to increase that part in electric vehicles as well, and heat pumps and everything that comes to an all-electric society in the end.
Yeah. And one just little final question just from me. We're reading a lot, and it's become a sort of a bit of an issue in Australia. It's not legal to install them yet, but what's called balcony solar and plug-in batteries and things like that. I'm not too sure whether SMI inverter technologies are involved with that, but I mean, what do you make of it, and is it a good thing, or does that sort of screw up your
I'm not a
business?
big fan of that. Of course, I can fully understand if you have a small flat and you have a balcony that you want to produce your own power. The fact is, of course, that all of these, I would say 100% are from China. They normally are not designed for 20 years, but for, say, 5 years. And then you normally just have your primary energy resources back, and or the energy used for that, for the production. Therefore, I'm not a very big fan of that. But the government is, and it's being pushed rather heavily. A lot of people adopt it, and quite often we do see that as an entry gauge for those people who then say, okay, now I want a bigger system as well. But I'm not such a big fan of it, to be honest, due to sustainability reasons. And if you look at it from an environmental aspect, it's not as green as you would like it to be if you buy a little module and put it on your balcony.
There has to be a lot of amateur electricians doing stuff as well. I can't think it's great for a fire risk, but anyway, it's not my business.
Yeah. Look, I'm just going to have to throw in one final question. I know you've got to run, but we're at solar being so cheap that you don't even notice it. I mean, what's your view of that when you're sort of building the components for it, the inverters and the things? I mean, how cheap will it get, and how dominant will it become? It's some of the forecasts are quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's exactly what has happened over the last 20 years. I mean, 20 years ago, there was a CEO of a renewable company or utility. He said photovoltaics is as meaningful as growing pineapple in Alaska. And now that company is our biggest customer. So we do have a big change. The prices of modules and of batteries have, of course, fallen tremendously. And nowadays, if we look at the generation of electricity from photovoltaics, we're down to under 2 euro cent per kilowatt hour. If you add storage, you're still way below nuclear and way below
Coal.
coal. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. And therefore, I think this trend will continue. It will not continue as steep, but we will see a continued decline in module prices and battery prices over the next coming years. And then this race will just be getting clearer. And we have just surpassed gas worldwide with photovoltaics production or energy from that. And also coal is being overtaken as we speak. So we do see this trend continuing, and it will not be stoppable. So it's much more important to think about the grid forming capabilities and to make the system stable. Introduce also more storage, but also power to gas applications, which we are, by the way, also working on. So
That's probably a good way to end. I mean, once again, often with these discussions, I feel we just sort of scratch the surface because this powder gas kind of is interesting, and the whole, molecules and changing them to electrons, probably another reason for another discussion sometime in the future. But we understand that you've got to run on with internal meetings. So look, Jürgen Reinart, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast. It's been a delight to have you on.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
You're back with the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles Parkinson and David Leach. What were your main takeaways from that, David? I thought a couple of things. I'm always interested when battery and inverter companies talk about grid-forming inverters and how they can do the job of spinning machines.
He was big on that, wasn't he?
He was. Well, look, I mean, it's the same with Tesla and Fluence are also the bigger that they will say it takes time.
I don't think they were talking their book, but anyway.
Well,
we know they don't do that.
Well, speaking of talking their book, I mean, he also spent a lot of time talking about China inverters and the spying and the other implications. And it does seem that a lot of SMA's strength in markets does rely on government protection in one form or another.
I agree with that, and I do think that there is going to be pushback in not just the United States but in Europe against too much China stuff. I mean, this is a very difficult and increasingly relevant conversation that's had not just in electricity but in all of manufacturing and other stuff. It's about comparative advantage and how far do you actually want to let it go. In the end, lower consumer prices are pretty important, but so are jobs.
Yeah. Well, when you do go to China and you're sitting there with the controls, see if you can make my car go backwards or something. That's a pretty bad joke. Moving quite along. But it is an issue that we don't really know, and it can be easily subject of a scare campaign and sort of xenophobic campaign. But it clearly is an issue as well in terms of industry dominance.
Quite frankly, the reality is I'm more scared about if I owned a Tesla that Elon Musk might impose some new piece of software on the as much as I am about what happened in my Chinese car.
Elon wouldn't do that, would he? Moving right along, David. There's no, but it's interesting anyway. I just think what Jürgen was talking about with the grid-forming inverters. And changing the way that people see the grid and what needs to be done and what technologies we need. And I think we got another taste of that this week at the Australian Energy Week. The very first session featured Daniel Westerman, the CEO of Australian Energy Market Operator. I mean, he confirmed stuff that we kind of already knew and we've already been observing and talked about on this podcast about the influence of battery storage. And you've written a piece about that, which we'll get to soon, on evening peaks and moderating demand. And of course, by doing that, moderating prices, not just large scale, but particularly household batteries. And I was really struck by his admission that even without VPPs, virtual power plants, even without orchestration, the passive nature of these batteries was still enough to deliver outstanding results. And he also admitted that basically the rollout of these home batteries has caused them to rethink significant parts of the ISP, which is due to come out in 2 weeks.
I don't think he's admitting it. He's when the facts change, so do opinions and strategies, and that's fine. It's what I think you can admire about that is the fact that he's recognising that, and I think the whole industry is having to adapt to the home battery rollout. It's been a lot of gigawatt hours that's come onto the market in a real hurry. As he pointed out, and as some of us have been talking about for ages, mass market behaviour and careful tariff design can be relied upon to produce, statistically predictable results about when home batteries will be in operation. The other thing about it is that you still need VPPs in theory for when you get these unusual events, price spikes. But the fact that batteries respond so quickly, and there are so many of them operating pretty much all the time now, means that price spikes in themselves are a lot less likely. And I think he was pointing to a heat wave in Melbourne earlier in the year. And this was,
Australia Day.
We've got more batteries now, a lot more than we had then. This is the other thing that, the rollout is still continuing apace, both at the home batteries. It's going in at like I think it was, what was it, we got from SunWiz last week. I think it was 1.4 gigawatt hours, wasn't it, or something in a month?
Yeah, look, they're still going in at 1,000 or 1,500 a day, so they're up to 430,000. Daniel Westerman's observation was that this is at least, or around about 1 kilowatt on average, lower demand in the evening
I
peaks.
used 2 in my notes for winter.
Well, you might well be right, actually. And so that's, that amounts to 400 or between 400
Or 800.
Or 800.
800 megawatts of power coming on in the evening peak.
Yes.
But as well as that, we've got all the utility batteries, which are enormous. And the fact of it is that, it's pushing gas out of the market. Average demand in the evening peak is down well over a gigawatt. It's pushing coal out of the market. It's pushing even hydro a little bit out of the market. And soon, as the battery rollout continues, on the numbers I was looking at, we'll have enough batteries to provide the NEM on an average day 12% of its energy. 12% will be stored. That's a lot. It's still not as much as Snowy Hydro promises once it starts operating, if it ever does.
If it ever does, yes. Well, just to point out that it has actually admitted or hinted that it's not going to be delivered by the end of 2028 as it had promised. And just on a side note, Dennis Barnes was quoted in the Financial Review. They're obviously having a big fight with UGL over who bears the cost of the massive cost overruns. It's double what it was supposed to cost. And he says, well, we're not in any hurry to resolve that because there's no need in the market for this gas generator to do anything very much. So.
But that hasn't stopped, of course, the Queensland government pressing on with essential coal and another gas generator. Those boys really do live in the last century, I've got to say. But anyway, they'll catch up one of these, maybe one of these decades. But the point, just to continue on the utility batteries for a second, because we've talked about how when the current rollout's complete, them and the home batteries is 12% of the average day will be stored. But in power terms, this is where the utility batteries really come into their own. There'll be something like 70% of peak demand can be met by utility batteries. Now, they won't all operate at once. The non-coincident, that's if you added up the maximum demand that the maximum power that batteries are supplied in South Australia, the maximum power in Victoria, it wasn't all at the 1 5-minute interval, but it's already over 5 gigawatts. So that's tending to reduce all these little spikes.
Yeah,
in the prices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've
also got another gigawatt of wind that's come on, and this is where Queensland wind has such a valuable role to play. It's not just in the seasonality of it. That wind in Queensland tends to operate when wind in New South Wales seasonally is less. It's also that Queensland wind operates more at night. And you can already see that in Queensland, the combination of the wind that we've had over the past 12 months come online, plus the batteries, it's made as big a difference in Queensland as it's made anywhere. And of course, the Queensland government naturally takes the credit for this. Success has many parents.
And it has done absolutely bloody nothing apart from sort of call in a couple of previously approved wind projects and cancelled at least one of them. And meanwhile, Lightsource BP is proudly announcing the start of construction and financial close of the Lower Wonga solar and hybrid battery, which is going to help power the Boyne Island smelters and the refineries up in Gladstone, which is the biggest energy user in Queensland, highlighting again once again the what the big energy users want in terms of generation and what these idiots and ideologues in the Queensland government want to choose.
And talking about hybrid batteries, the other big thing that's going on that it's very interesting to see Frank Calabria, the CEO of Origin, the very respected CEO, having paid top dollar for his wind project in the southwest of New South Wales, paid $300 million for the rights to build it, has suddenly discovered that it's actually fairly expensive. When you don't build any, you only look at this topic about once every decade. It's probably going to move a fair bit in those 10 years. But the point I wanted to get to, we need to make some moves to lower the costs of wind. And the basic way, undoubtedly, is to get out of this boom-bust cycle in it and just to build wind steadily and continuously. To me, that's absolutely obvious. But in terms of what individual companies can do, it was great to see John Titchen, was it, from Goldwind or Goldwind generally, saying how at their Kirpabella wind farm, which they're still yet to build, it's been ready to build for about a century, they're now going to put little 5 megawatt batteries on every turbine and, share some of the costs of the turbine, the footings and stuff, and get their wind hybrid battery that way. And I think that's quite an innovative solution.
They've been testing this technology at the Mirrabel wind farm. Is it Mirrabel? Yeah, in Victoria for a while ago. We've been writing a few stories about this. Not every turbine, as it turns out, David. I think 53 of the 69 turbines to be built. I don't know why they're not doing the other 16. We should find out. But it's actually quite interesting. And each one of these little batteries, each one of these turbines, will have about 5 megawatts, 25 megawatt hours of battery storage attached to it. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that operates.
I think it should let them firm up the site generally. When one wind turbine's not blowing, its battery can still be working and so on. And so it will enable their ability to write a firm power contract much more, I believe.
Well, there you go.
Some more.
So we might actually see that Copperbilla wind farm being built, because that's probably the only one of those very early winners of the Altesses in New South Wales that is yet to start construction, as far as I'm aware. I might have got that wrong, but
it's got specific issues with the turbine size and the actual voltage of the line it can connect to. So because of the voltage, it can only have last generation turbines. So I might have that wrong. I get a lot of things wrong.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. A couple of other things. Just while we're in that area down the southwest of New South Wales, the New South Wales government has thrown in $220 million in its latest budget to upgrade or to help pay for the upgrade of the Dinawan substation there. Substation. That's interesting because, as we've remarked upon, that whole southwest renewable zone is not as big as it should be. And Project Energy Connect, which is finally energised, Brett Redmond from Transgrid announces this week, after many cost overruns and delays, is not big enough. It's 330 kilovolts instead of what it should be, which is 500 kilovolts.
750.
750 watt.
That's what the lines we should be building from these renewable energy zones, 750 kilovolts.
I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Like they're building in China and Texas. If you're going to build a line, let's build it properly. If you're going to go through all this aggro, don't stuff around. Go maxi.
Well said, David. Well said. Okay, I'll take that down. I'm going to write that down. Scribble that down. Note, 750 kilowatts. Ministers listening to this, 750 kilowatts. Yes.
Then you could run like 5 gigawatts or 6 gigawatts. Like I said, it would be, when you would do the arithmetic, I'm pretty sure if you did the study properly, and Victoria did it properly, they would find that building that line to that voltage would be a lot cheaper than doing offshore wind. It would just mean cooperating with New South Wales. I know it's difficult for two states to cooperate, but they could probably share the benefits. Now, you mentioned the $200 million that EnergyCo is putting in, but I think the New South Wales government is also putting 60 million in to the community benefits scheme there. Now, if you think about it, the difference between putting 60 million into the Irana zone and 60 million into the southwest zone, there might only be 60 people in the southwest. No, that's an exaggeration. But I mean, the benefits per head down there, they're going to love it. They're going to do really well. Little town Jerilderie, just outside the renewable energy zone, where I should have been this week at model plane competition, 47th year, but because I was going to China, I couldn't go there. But it's going to get some money. Thank God. They need another couple of restaurants and another pub, but it's all happened with these community benefits.
Absolutely. While we're still down in that area, I'm not too sure what to make of this, but
did I ever tell you that joke my grandfather told me about everything was off the menu except cockatoo? But anyway, let's not go there.
We're
still down in the area.
You just did, David. You just did. The biggest data centre in Australia is going to be built in just where Project Energy Connect ends, actually, at the Bundy substation in South Australia. Interesting that it's going to be 800 megawatts, which is going to do something to the South Australian grid, seeing it only averages about twice that much and has a peak of maybe just 4 times that much. In theory, that sort of soaks up all the excess rooftop solar they have in one fell swoop. And it's going there because the state's 100% renewables, and it will be writing more PPAs as it rolls out its thing. So That, it appears, at least on face value, to be a good outcome. If you can have a data center, put it in a place where there's lots of renewables and get it to build more. We're yet to see how that actually plays out in practice, both there and in other states where there just seems to be a lot of people thinking about data centers and saying, oh, that's a good idea to build a gas-fired power station, looking at you, Energy Australia and AGL. And then we've had Gamuda from Malaysia buying a stake in the North Hazelwood battery in the Latrobe Valley and looking to supersize what is already a big battery plan with a specific look at data center partners. There you go.
Yeah, so I think data centers are going to be a very ongoing topic, that's for sure. And I think there is an opportunity for Australia to do it right. And but you have to do it very carefully, because if you do it wrong, it's very obvious there's going to be a lot of opposition to it, and you're going to conflate the whole ideological argument about is AI a good thing or a bad thing, and therefore are data centers necessary or unnecessary, or can you do them well or badly, and what benefit do they bring to the country? Do they have to bring? I think we heard Brett Redmond saying today they have to bring their own transmission. Everyone thinks they should bring their own wind and solar. Then there's the backup. There's the role they can play. They can probably create demand response. Even if they don't want to have their own demand response, they could probably pay someone else to turn off. That might be cheaper. But they bring a lot with them.
Well, they do. No, it's going to be an interesting and fraught topic. But as you say, if it's done right, then it could be a good thing, and it could help us in our transition, at least to get some wind farms built anyway. Just on a couple of other things, David. Solid tariffs, anti-dumping rules, a recommendation that tariffs be imposed on hollow steel sections, which are used in the support of solar modules on solar farms. Looking at sort of putting a 48.3% duty on these imports from China, Malaysia, Taiwan, and somewhere else I can't quite remember. And solar industry is not very happy about it, because it could add, probably only about 5% on overall cost. But things are a struggle at the moment, so that would be unnecessary. This, of course, has been requested by BlueScope and its subsidiary Orcon, and so there's going to be a bit of a fight about that. And I think it's probably one that the clean energy industry has largely ignored until now. There's a ruling from the Minister of Industry, Tim Ayres, going, yes, we agree with this. So how it's going to be imposed and when it's going to be imposed. It looks like it could be retrospective. So there could be a few EPC contractors caught out, depending on the nature of their contracts. David, I've also got some news from the Bellevue gold mine in Western Australia. I love these stories. It's aimed to go 80%, at least 80% renewables. It's actually been going gangbusters and much more than that. It got to about 93.8% over the whole March quarter.
What is their renewable power, Giles? You might as well tell our listeners.
Well, it's wind and solar. They've got 24 megawatts of wind turbines, about 20 megawatts of solar. They've got a battery. And they've run 155 hours, engines off, so 100% renewables, just with the wind, solar, and batteries, which is kind of interesting, which is kind of cool. It's probably the biggest for a grid of that size. I mean, it's only 12.5 megawatts, but
I've just been thinking, in Queensland, coal's essential. So how do they keep the lights on in Tasmania and South Australia, and even most of West Australia?
Rub two sticks together, David. I don't know. They got a big line from somewhere to somewhere. The sun shines out of, I don't know. Who knows?
Next, you'll be telling me that when you turn the tap on, it rains. Because we need firm water.
Well, we could all go up to the Smart Energy Conference in Brisbane and learn the truth, David. Learn the truth. Facts.
All right, Giles, I think it must be getting late at night that we're doing this interview. I'm running out of useful things to say.
No, I'm just going to say one more other thing about Chris Bowen over in Bonn, having his first fun as President of Negotiations for the upcoming.
I'm sure he's anxiously waiting for our podcast, because we know he listens every week. Sorry.
Well, I don't know whether he's going to have time while he's in Bonn, but he may find time. Who knows? But anyway, look, it's only just started. And then have to wrap up quickly because the World Cup kicks off in about 36 hours.
When I'm away, yes.
And the will they be broadcasting that in China? That's a comment.
No, let's keep going, Charles.
Anyway, look, he and Turkey, so Australia and Turkey have sort of sponsored this action agenda. Well, it's mostly been put together, I think, by Turkey with the support of Australia. 35% electrification target by 2035. Now, that's our final energy consumption. And that's an interesting one. Michael.
Does that mean Australia and Turkey, when they play in the World Cup, should have a draw or something?
Well, it's going to be interesting, actually, yes. That's going to be on Sunday. The Bonn Climate Conference is probably going to be over by then, but there you go. Yeah, they should. But anyway, look, that's a good target, electrification target, because it just means households and businesses...
like Australia's 80% target, that's a pretty good target too. It's like targets or announcements are one thing, I want to say, and achievements on the ground are another. Like, I'm all supportive of Chris Bowen being over there doing his bit for the world. I think it's great that we're on the world stage, but nothing convinces other actors around the world like when we're doing it here in Australia and reaching our own electrification goals. And getting on with the electrification of transport. And there's still so much more policy that could be done. And I'm deadly serious here. If you're the government in power and you want to demonstrate your credentials over the rabble and grievance parties that we've got going. And they're so anti-renewables and everything, and we're showing with lower electricity prices exactly that the policies that the government has been striving towards and that business actually understands when it gets drummed into them that it actually does work. We need to go a lot harder on transport and diesel. Just because the diesel price is coming down a little bit doesn't mean that we should seize that opportunity and go really hard there. And that's the message I want to say, that the whole of government policy, it's the time to go harder, not to ease off. We've seen with the home battery plan, it actually bloody works.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just think it's been a sort of a fantastic piece of policy and enormously successful. And it allows people like Bowen and his Turkish counterpart to get up there and say strong messages. And I've been a bit of a student of these climate conferences for some time now. And you do get countries who sort of mouth the words, but sort of back off pretty quickly. But so far, both of these countries are looking pretty strong in the support of the UN and the IEA, and they're making very strong statements. And we know that the US is going to do bugger all, and other countries will also do bugger all. But I think a lot of the rest of the world are just saying now that these technologies are here, they're cost competitive, and they work.
Leadership does matter, and you say about the US doing bugger all, it's doing a lot worse than that. It's putting sand in every gear it can. But having said that, it was interesting to see that, according to Ember, solar generation in the United States exceeded coal generation last month. But that's just a fact, we know how unimportant actual facts are.
Yeah, well, now they've just announced a campaign to spend $350 million pulling apart subsea buoys, which are important for sort of getting climate information about the impact of oceans and temperatures and things like that. So
they're not going to. We talked about that in our first podcast of the year. All those buoys that float around the place. As Professor Matthew England pointed out, they're quite hard to find. That's the one advantage.
Well, they're going looking for them.
That's a good thing to spend money on, isn't it? Look, Giles, we could talk all night, and no doubt some people will, but...
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Dave. Well, look, you have a fun trip in China. I'll go off and find some people here to interview. But hopefully you can come back with a couple of interesting interviews.
Discussions myself. Yes, I hope so. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, or actually maybe you should do that because you're the sponsor man.
Yes, well, that's right. Yeah, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Pylon, for their ongoing and continued support. And do check out our other podcasts, the Driven podcast, focusing on EVs. Quite an interesting episode last week with the share of EVs getting to 20%, which we didn't really mention, actually, David. It was very exciting. Or did we mention that last week? I can't remember. No, we did mention it last week in our talk with Joseph Tadic from Tesla Energy, which was a great interview, and thanks once again for him for coming on. Switched on.
I never got round to saying thanks to Joseph, but he actually said on that podcast, I would never question David Leitch's figures, which shows he doesn't listen hard enough because everyone else questions them, and quite rightly. But anyway, go on.
He might have just been overawed, David, by your presence or menaced. One of the two. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much. We'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week. God knows what it's going to look like, but we'll see. Bye for now.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Australia's top solar companies trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.